week 8 of the fantasy football season. Here's the top 36 running backs I'm ranking this week. So with tons of teams on bye. This week it's going to be thin, especially the back part of this list. Number 1, Bijan Robinson of the Atlanta Falcons. What a season it's been so far for Bijan Robinson. This week a great matchup versus the Miami Dolphins, a defense that can't stop anyone. And Bijan, week in and week out, seems like he goes out there at least 100 total yards and a touchdown. This week versus Miami, I wouldn't be surprised if he goes for 150 total yards and finds the end zone. Number 2, Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts. What a season it's been for JT. Last week, 3 touchdowns in that blowout victory versus the Los Angeles Chargers. And this week, a slam dunk matchup versus the Tennessee Titans, one of the worst teams in the league, and a team, obviously, he's had a lot of success playing in the same division against throughout his NFL career. So this week, I think Taylor once again goes out there and is a big game. Number 3, Christian McCaffrey of the San Francisco 49ers. CMC, I've said it a million times in these videos, when healthy, he is one of the best running backs in all pro football and all fantasy football. And last week, he put on a masterpiece on that Sunday night game versus the Atlanta Falcons. So this week, a little bit of a tougher matchup at the Texans. But obviously, CMC, one of the best backs in the league, and the top 3 option weekly. Number 4, James Cook of the Buffalo Bills. It's been another solid year for James Cook. This week, a good matchup at the Carolina Panthers, a defense that isn't that good against the run. And also as well, he's coming off a bye week where this offense should be refreshed and get things going early and often. Number 5, Josh Jacobs of the Green Bay Packers. So this offense is built around Josh Jacobs and working off the play action. And that's when Jordan Love gets the ball down the field. But Jacobs, he's been on a tear over the last 3 ball games for him. And this week at Pittsburgh, we saw last week Chase Brown have a successful game versus that defense. I think Jacobs once again goes out there and he'll get his 15-20 fantasy points a minimum. Number 6, Devon Achane of the Miami Dolphins. Achane, the only bright spot this season pretty much for this Miami Dolphin team. He's a dual threat out of the backfield. He could do it all. And at least 15 or more fantasy points all season long, it seems like Achane's been scoring. So this week, not the greatest of matchups, but an indoor game in Atlanta, which is always a plus on the fast track. I like him once again to go out there and be a top 6 option. Number 7, Saquon Barkley of the Philadelphia Eagles. Saquon Barkley, it's been a struggle for him majority of the season. The last 2 weeks, he's failed to reach double-digit fantasy points. And this week versus former team, the New York Giants, where a few weeks ago they held them down in that one. I can't see Saquon going out there and having another bad game versus former team. So I think this week he goes out there and he bounces back. Number 8, Derrick Henry of the Baltimore Ravens. Derrick Henry, it's been an up-and-down season for him, but he's another running back. Even at the latter part of his career in terms of age for running backs, he's still going to go out there more weeks than not, have a productive game. I know the Chicago Bear defense, they're playing better of late, but I still think Derrick Henry, he goes out there, has a good ball game for this Baltimore Raven team, and he's a running back where it just takes 1 or 2 big plays for him to have a day. Number 9, Javonte Williams of the Dallas Cowboys. Cowboy offensive line, one of the better lines in all the league. And Javonte Williams, what a bounce-back season it's been for him, where he signed in the offseason a 1-year, $3 million deal, and now he's one of the best backs in fantasy football and pro football. And you know, this week, the adrenaline's going to be rushing versus his former team that gave up on him after the ACL injury and a bad season last year after coming back from it. So I think Williams, he's going to be motivated and once again have a good game. Number 10, Cam Skattebo of the New York Giants. Skattebo, he's been a great rookie this season for this Giant team, and it's hard to believe that he was a 5th rounder, was Cam Skattebo. So this week in a matchup where really put him on the map a couple weeks ago with Philly, where I had over 100 total yards and 3 rushing touchdowns in that game. I think Skattebo once again goes out there and puts on a good performance. Number 11, Rachaad White of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Rachaad White, I think one more week, he's going to be the starter. Then they go on bye week as Tampa Bay, and then we'll see Bucky Irvin back in week 10. So White, one of the better dual threat backs out of the backfield, one of the better receiving backs in between the tackles. Yards per carry, not great, but a guy at least 4 or 5 receptions a game, and he's going to get his yards more weeks than not. And this week with a great matchup with the Saints, I think White could bounce back after a down game last week. Number 12, Quinshon Judkins of the Cleveland Browns. Quinshon Judkins, last week he went out there and he tore it up versus the Miami Dolphins. 84 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns on 25 carries. So this week, obviously a tougher matchup at the Patriots, an underrated unit and led by Mike Vrabel, the head coach, who's obviously a defensive-minded guy and was a linebacker in his playing days. But Quinshon Judkins, he's getting the full workload. Dylan Sampson, Jerome Ford haven't been factors. And I think Judkins once again goes out there and has a good game. 13, Chase Brown the Cincinnati Bengals. Chase Brown the last couple weeks, just like this whole offense since Joe Flacco got traded for and starting now for the Cincinnati Bengal team, has gone out there and playing better football than he was in the middle weeks early in the season. So this week, a good matchup versus Jets. Their run defense isn't all that great. We saw Rico Dotto, Chuba Hubbard have good ball games versus them last week. And even going back to week 5, Javonte Williams had a big game versus defense. I think Chase Brown goes out there and has a good game once again. 14, DeAndre Swift, the Chicago Bears. DeAndre Swift, the last 2 games, he's been one of the better running backs in fantasy football is DeAndre Swift, going over 150 total yards, finding the end zone. He's been the main guy in this offense now the last couple weeks where Rome Odunze's taken a little bit of a backseat. And this Bear team with Ben Johnson obviously is the head coach. He brought a lot of that offensive principle and play calling as the coordinator over there in Detroit, over here to Chicago, even though I think those playmakers are more talented in Detroit than they here in Chicago. But DeAndre Swift in a matchup at Baltimore where their defense has been gashed all season long, I like him as a top 15 option this week. 15, J.K. Dobbins of the Denver Broncos. J.K. Dobbins, it's been a solid year for him. I know the last couple weeks the numbers have been a little bit down. He's failed to reach double-digit fantasy points. But this week, a slam dunk matchup versus the Dallas Cowboys. A defense that can't stop anyone. Even though last week they went out there and I thought they held their own pretty much a majority of that game versus the Commanders. Even though they were down Deebo Samuel and Terry McLaurin and Jaden Daniels left the game early with the hamstring injury. But J.K. Dobbins, as long as he's getting his 15, 18 touches a game, more weeks than not, he's going to work into production. 16, Jalen Warren of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So Jalen Warren, it's been a solid year for him as the starter this season. I know Kenneth Gainwell, he's been a decent backup as well and even filled in one game and had a big ball game. But this week in a decent matchup versus a Packer defense that all of a sudden has been leaky over the last few weeks. I think Warren goes out there and has a good ball game. 17, Breece Hall with the New York Jets. Breece Hall, I think he's going to get traded in the next couple weeks here. Is Breece Hall from this New York Jet team. They don't want to re-sign him, and he's not getting the big work like he did last season even as Breece Hall. So Breece Hall's still a talented running back, dual threat out of the backfield, good receiver. But this Jet offense, the worst offense in pro football, and they've now turned to the veteran Tyrod Taylor as the starter. So we'll see if this offense can get kickstarted. 18, Rico Dotto of the Carolina Panthers. Last week they had a committee over there with him and Chuba Hubbard, and rightfully so. But Rico Dotto looked like the better running back out of the backfield, even though we know Hubbard's more of a receiving back than Rico Dotto. But this week in a matchup versus Buffalo, that give up the 3rd most fantasy points to running backs on the season, I think Rico Dotto could go out there and be the guy that has a better game out of this committee. 19, Jordan Mason of the Minnesota Vikings. So Aaron Jones' practice window opened up. He practiced so far to start the week off, and this is a Thursday night game at the Chargers. But still, Jordan Mason, even when Aaron Jones was healthy early in the season, he was getting a lot of work, and especially the goal line work. So this week at the Chargers, like I said, with Jones most likely coming back, I still like Mason as a top 20 option. 20 staying in the same game, Kamini Vidal of the Los Angeles Chargers. Vidal, a couple weeks ago, we had a big ball game in Miami, but who doesn't? And then last week, they were down early and often. They had to abandon the run, and they had a big passing game with this Los Angeles Charger team. But Vidal this week versus Minnesota, I think he could go out there and have a bounce-back performance. 21, Ramondre Stevenson of the New England Patriots. I don't like this backfield at all pretty much over there in New England, but obviously it looks like right now Stevenson's the guy over there in New England with Trevion Henderson. He's pretty much been non-existent over the last few weeks, and you thought Henderson would get more of a workload, obviously, with Gibson out for the season, but that hasn't been the case. So this week on volume, Stevenson alone in the middle of the pack matchup versus the Browns. He's a top 21 option. 22, Alvin Kamara of the New Orleans Saints. Secondre Miller's out for the season, toward the ACL. They were splitting in the backfield over the last month of the year was Calvin Kamara and Miller. But now Kamara, he's going to get a few more touches, I think, in this backfield, even though we could see Taysom Hill now do more end around and trick plays and stuff like that. But this week, a decent matchup versus Tampa Bay. Obviously, a good track record it's been for Kamara throughout his career versus them as a division opponent. 23, Bill Krosky-Merritt of the Washington Commanders. Last week, it was a down game for the Commanders total, getting blown out 44-22 to the Dallas Cowboys. And this week, it could be another tough ball game, obviously, at the Kansas City Chiefs, where they're on fire and their defense is playing good, and Arrowhead's a tough place to play. But Krosky-Merritt, he's easily the number one over there. I know they got Chris Rodriguez, Jeremy McNichols, but they really haven't been a factor in the backfield. Sikorsky Merritt, he's going to get his work, but we'll just see, because he's pretty much been a touchdown-dependent back as well. 24, Chuba Hubbard of the Carolina Panthers. So like I've said early in the video, I think Rico Dowdle's the better back out of the two. Last week they split in the backfield and both had decent ball game at the New York Jets. And this week a matchup versus Buffalo, like I said as well, give up the third most fantasy points to running backs on the season. And I think they don't want Andy Dalton throwing the football 35, 40 times a game as this Carolina Panther team. So I think Chuba Hubbard and Dowdle, they both could get anywhere from 12, 15 touches each. In this one, 25, Isaiah Pacheco of the Kansas City Chiefs. So Pacheco, it hasn't been a great year for him. It's a contract season. And Brashard Smith, who I'm going to talk about later in the video, ate into the workload last week. I know, obviously, some of it was garbage time. They were off to a good start and blowing out the Raiders by the second quarter in the game last week. But Pacheco, like I said, if he's been a touchdown-dependent running back and a guy who hasn't been great this season, 26, Woody Marks of the Houston Texans. I've said this for a couple weeks now on and off. I think Woody Marks, he's the number one guy to own in the backfield over there for this Houston Texan team. Nick Chubb, a lot of knee injuries on and off over the last few seasons. Definitely lost burst and lost his speed. And Woody Marks is a guy, obviously, I know he's a smaller back, but could go out there, catch the football out of the backfield, running between the tackles. And he's been playing decent the last few weeks. He is the rookie Mark. So this week, even in a matchup versus San Francisco, where their defense has been pretty decent over the last few weeks here, even with the injuries to Fred Warner out for the season and Nick Bosa, Woody Marks this week, he's a back end 2-3 running back. 27, Tony Pollard of the Tennessee Titans. So last week it was good to see Pollard obviously go out there and catch the football out of the backfield, where he used to do that a lot for the Dallas Cowboys. But with Callahan out, Tony Pollard got good work last week, better than Tajay Spears. I still think it's Tony Pollard's backfield, but the only thing they're going to be trailing a lot, obviously, is this Tennessee Titan team, where he's going to be Tony Pollard in and out of the lineup, not getting a full workload is Tony Pollard. But this week in Indianapolis, a team he's been familiar with now over the last season and change, being over here with Tennessee. I think he's another running back that could get some volume and put up an okay game. 28, Aaron Jones of the Minnesota Vikings. He's practicing out of the window after he was hurt for a few weeks, was Aaron Jones on IR. And Aaron Jones, even before the injury, Jordan Mason was eating into the workload and getting goal line touches for the majority of the touches when they were in the red zone. So this week at the Chargers, their defense has been struggling mightily. They can't stop anyone of late. But like I said, Aaron Jones, the ceiling isn't high, and especially if he's going to keep losing goal line touches to Jordan Mason. 29, Brashard Smith of the Kansas City Chiefs. So last week, he had the most work of his NFL career as the rookie. And to me, I think he's the best back over there in Kansas City is Brashard Smith. Between, obviously, Isaiah Pacheco and Kareem Hunt. So this week, a good matchup versus the Commanders. Javonte Williams went out there last week. He had a big game versus defense. And Brashard Smith, he could catch the football out of the backfield, was a receiver in college, and his pass protection's pretty good as well. So I think as the weeks go on, he is going to get more work. 30, Tajay Spears of the Tennessee Titans. So Tajay Spears, it's been a solid last couple weeks for him, where he was out the first month of the season with an injury. And this week in Indianapolis, they're most likely going to be trailing early in this game, down 10, 14 points, and they got to catch up and play from behind the whole game, where that's where Spears comes in, and he's a good receiver out of the backfield. In between the tackles, obviously you're not going to get much from him. That's where Tony Pollard comes into play, but the ceiling is still low for Spears, where he has to actually go out there and catch 4 or 5 passes and get decent yard after catch to put up some fantasy points. 31, Nick Chubb of the Houston Texans. So like I said, Nick Chubb, the better days are behind him, unfortunately, with these knee injuries and getting up there in age now with a lot of wear and tear on his body, where he was a big workhorse with the Cleveland Browns for many seasons. So this week versus San Francisco, I think they're going to be trailing in that ball game, and then they're going to have to play catch-up, and that's obviously where Woody Marks comes in, and he's the passing downs back and third down back. So Nick Chubb this week, not a high ceiling. 32, Tyler Algier of the Atlanta Falcons. So Tyler Algier, there's some weeks he's popped off with good games, and he's one of the best handcuff running backs in all the league. Before they drafted Bijan Robinson, he had a 1,000-yard season under his belt, is Tyler Algier. So this week versus Miami, I think they could get off to a big lead, and then second half, that's when Algier comes in and he runs down the clock, and that's where he's gotten some fantasy points in these type of situations this season. 33, R.J. Harvey of the Denver Broncos. So R.J. Harvey, it's been a bad rookie season for the most part this year. I know last week he had a touchdown in that game, but besides that, he didn't do anything as R.J. Harvey. So J.K. Dobbins, he's been the better back all season long. I know Harvey comes in on third down and passing downs back, but this week it is a good matchup versus the Dallas Cowboys. If it's any week he breaks out and has a good game, it would be this week before Kyle Monangai of the Chicago Bears. So Monangai last week, he had a big workload. It was a blowout game into the second half, but we know Ben Johnson going back with the Lions obviously like using two backs and David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. So I think Swift's still going to get majority of the touches. Monangai, he's going to work in on certain downs in certain situations. But like I said, he's definitely someone in 12-team leagues or deeper to be on your roster. And this week at Baltimore, we'll see how this ball game goes and how many touches he gets. 35, Kenneth Gainwell of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So Kenneth Gainwell, one of the better handcuff backs in the league. We saw early in the season versus Minnesota, he had a monster game with Kenneth Gainwell when Warren was out and he was filling in. But like I said, he's not getting many touches of late. Warren's playing great football since he came back. But Kenneth Gainwell, at times this season, he has stolen some goal line touchdowns. So maybe this week he could get one of those once again versus a middle-of-the-pack Green Bay defense the last couple of weeks. And the 36th and final back I'm ranking is Justice Hill of the Baltimore Ravens. So this Raven team, we'll see how healthy they are coming out of the bye. They're 1-5 on the season, and Justice Hill, he's had some big games. I know it's been some garbage time this season, but like I said, at the back end of this list with all these teams on bye this week, it's going to be slim pickings in this running back position. So like I said, Justice Hill, if you're in a pinch, we know he's the passing downs back, third down back, and if this could be a high-scoring game, he could get some opportunity in this one versus the Bears. That's the top 36 running backs I'm ranking for Week 8 of the fantasy football season.